I said 2050. I want to be clear about that. In 2026, the figure being cited, cautiously with caveats, in the language scientists use when they don't want to be accused of alarmism, was that coral reefs might be functionally extinct by 2050. They were wrong. Not in the direction they were hoping. It's 2103. I'm 123 years old. I've outlived most of the ocean's living infrastructure. That is not a metaphor. Coral reefs covered roughly 285,000 square kilometers of ocean floor in 2026. A quarter of all marine species depended on them. 500 million people depended on coral-adjacent ecosystems for food or coastal protection. The Great Barrier Reef had already experienced its sixth mass bleaching event in 2024. The sixth. Journalists in 2026 were still writing about it as though each event was a surprise, as though the pattern were not the story. The pattern was always the story. What killed the reefs in the end was not one thing, it was the accumulation. Ocean temperatures 1 degree above the coral's tolerance threshold triggered bleaching. 2 degrees killed. The ocean warmed unevenly, which gave people hope. This reef is still alive, that one is recovering. But the heat events came faster each decade. Recovery times shrank. By 2041, the thermal windows were too short. Ocean acidification ran parallel. CO2 absorbed by seawater creates carbonic acid. Carbonic acid dissolves the calcium carbonate that coral skeletons are built from. The reef was being cooked and dissolved simultaneously. Scientists had models for this. The models were correct. That was the tragedy of all of it. The models were correct. By 2038, the functional collapse of the Indo-Pacific reef systems had begun. Not extinction, there were still organisms, still remnant patches, but the ecosystem services were gone. The fish populations that depended on reef nurseries had collapsed. The coastal wave buffering was gone. Storm surge damage in the Philippines and Indonesia doubled between 2038 and 2045. The interventions were attempted: coral gardening, assisted evolution to breed heat-tolerant strains, shading projects, alkalinity enhancement. Some worked locally, briefly. There is a reef off Bermuda today in 2103 that exists almost entirely because of human intervention. 80 years of continuous effort to keep one reef alive. One. They call it the museum reef. That is not a compliment. The food consequences were what most people had not anticipated. Not intellectually, the dependency was documented. But the translation of ecosystem collapse into hunger required seeing it happen. 2 billion people who relied on ocean protein as their primary food source began facing shortfalls by the late 2030s. Aquaculture scaled, but not fast enough, and not for people without money. What I remember about 2026, and I was 46 years old, I was a city planner, I was not an uninformed person, is that I understood these facts the same way I understood that I would die someday. Abstractly. It was true, but it wasn't urgent. The reef dying wasn't urgent until my daughter asked me to take her snorkeling, and I couldn't find a reef worth taking her to. They said 2050. The functional collapse of more than 90% of reef systems was documented by 2044, 6 years early, which is the sort of thing that sounds like good news until you understand what it means. It means the models were optimistic. It means we should have been more afraid, sooner. I'm transmitting this so that the sooner is now, for you, not for me. My sooner is long gone.